Well, the sun's out, so we're doing a bit of deep cleaning on the auxiliary components. I think this is the clutch housing. I can't remember because it seems ages. It's nearly a year since we took it off anyway. I've got to check the bearing, but I'll be highly surprised if that's in good nick, given the one on the other end's got, I think, 17th hour clearance on it, or wear. So I'm taking a look at the main through drive shaft. Just to explain it, this end of it is sitting into the headstock inside another gear. It runs in a bronze bearing. You've then got a spline shaft, a pair of ball races inside the pulley which is being driven, and obviously the clutch brake unit around that to transfer, so when the clutch is engaged that pulley's transferred and basically drives onto the splines. Now this section here and this section here both run in bronze bushes. That section is into the outer face of the casting of the headstock, so that face of the gear via that sits up against there. When I've measured it up, there's about, I think it's 12th hour clearance between diameter, oh dear, that and the idea that, which seems hellish excessive. At the other end of it, I've got a dimension of 982 thou against 994 thou on the ID of this one, which again seems somewhat excessive. Now that shaft's only actually rotating when the lathe is actually working. When the clutch is disengaged, that shaft just sits still. So it still seems a little excessive as play. Starting to look at it in terms of why that wear has happened, apart from the fact it's 70-year-old. The outside bushing has got this little Winkler oiler. So you spin that round, a couple of drops of oil dribbles through, and you can see the oil lines. So I don't think that the bearing has worn excessively. It seems an odd size for it to be a few thou under an inch. I would have expected it to be an inch and then worn to slightly larger than an inch. But the shaft, as I say, is measuring at 982. And there's wear on the shaft as well. What I've measured up is if I actually increase that to, say I half the difference on it, so instead of it being 13 thou, say I put another 6 or 7 thou on it, the nut that goes on here would still clear it. So I could build that end up. And we've already established that these bearing seats have been built up. They're a thou under inch and an eighth. Now this one doesn't seem to be excessively worn. There's about a thou variation over it. But the bronze bushing is worn. Now that bronze bushing has oil lines in it, but there's no feed to it externally. There's an oil line in here, and it's drilled out, and that drilling goes all the way down to there. So there's oil that can travel along the shaft, lubricate these two bearings, lubricate that, and I guess lubricate the face. However, the only way the oil can get into there is if you like, is the oil inside the headstock, which seems a slightly odd setup to me. That's where it's going in. So it would mean that the oil bath has got to be high enough for it to be able to splash in, or certainly get into that outside hole. And I think at some stage that oil bath's been allowed to drop, and this majority of this wear has occurred as a result of basically lack of lubrication. What I'm toying with the idea is, do I actually, I'll have to replace that, I think, because I could build that up It's not that far off though. The wear is all in the bearing. So if I replace that bushing, do I then line myself up? And from memory, I think that's the top of the casting, and actually drill an oil line through there, pick it up on the top of the casting there, and then I'd have to have some kind of arrangement to bring it out, and then just put another oil feed on, so that would actually feed directly into that, which in itself would just give an additional feed down the line. Seems a lot of work. Maybe I'm overcomplicating it, I don't know. But I've not seen anything like that before. It seems an odd way of doing it. And you're basically relying on the headstock oil to lubricate that end of the shaft. And I don't think it would have been a huge problem for them to design in a different, just a little oil winkler feed on that. Anyway, I might have missed something, but that's the way I currently understand it. Pricing things up, if I replace that, just that one piece of phosphor bronze, just to do that one piece, is about 40 quid. So I've got to do a bit of shopping round. I don't want to put it back as it is, because it's a bit, I think the phrase I used to hear at work was, it's a piss fit. It'll certainly run like that, but I don't want a load of rattling and clanking. So just for me to get a better idea what the hell's going on, that's the two halves of the outer casting for the clutch assembly, with the shaft in position. It's not lubed or anything, and there's nothing hanging on it, but if you watch the lower portion, most of that noise is from the lower bearing. The top bearing isn't actually that bad. I mean, I'd prefer it a little bit more snug, but we pull that off. That's what we've got to get a shot of. One bush. Get another couple of them and we can have our own shrubbery. Interesting that it's been relieved all the way around the lubrication point. So I've pulled the first bronze bush out, so that's the tail end one. The plan is to make some new replacements, but make them to size the shaft that we've got. So I made up a top hat collar with a clearance hole for a 16mm M16. That goes up inside and locates, and then that's just happened to be a spacer larger than that. And then there's a piece of tube which I'll go and find, which is actually just length of scaffolding tube. So the nuts on the bottom, threads up through with the collar, then a tube, and then this thick washer, and just wind the end down. However, got to lock that end, otherwise the whole shaft spins, which is a pain in the arse, because then once you start pulling it, that goes up inside the owl. But it came off, took about 3 minutes. So we just set up for pulling the next bushing out. I've had to make a new another collar and tube, which was a piece of scrap tubing, which has proven to be pretty tough steel. Anyway, so I've got locking nut on the threaded shaft, and then another nut over it, spanner locked on it. And then we just wind the big nut down. Probably going to have to put the camera down in a minute. Yeah. Oh, put you in the sky up and bring you back. I'll make sure that this collar is over the top of it. Only half inch in it. There we go. Right, so there we go. Took a bit longer than anticipated because I've got to make that tube and then that tube. The two plugs were pretty much straightforward, and I'll use those to pull or press in, probably pull them in the replacements. So yeah, fresh saw cut end of piece of bronze bar, cut with a power hacksaw, so it's a straight cut. What is it that produces that that arc? It's bizarre. That's the first bushing been made. And I've got 1.5 clearance, and when I've cleaned the end of that out, it's basically a fit. It's the same dimension, so that's why it requires a bit of a press fit. Making the sleeves a slightly different way than I'd planned. Having chatted with Chris, I thought I'll ask him how he would do it. So the biggest difference is he only grips the very bloody edge of it, face it off, drill it through, and then drill it to about 1/8 of an inch under the ID. Then finish the OD to the size you want, then come back and bore the ID to the size that you want. I've tried to I've tried to extract from him the reason for doing it that way, and he just said, well, that's the way I was taught, and there were various bits of conversation, but the long and the short of it is it works and he doesn't change it. Thinking about it, it would enable you to basically, you can finish it all without taking it out, whereas my approach was stuff that right in the chuck, whop a drill through, bore it out to size, and then hold it on either an expanding mandrel or a mandrel that's made to fit between centres, and then turn the outside so that you know it's concentric. I mean, expanding mandrel's far better than a sort of wedge fit mandrel, but yeah, it's just a different approach. And I guess my time's not costed on the basis of hourly rates, so if it's one fit in the chuck, it's going to be more effective, more efficient. Anyway, if I don't ask, you don't find out. So this is just making up the second one, which is a replacement for that one. Just waiting for it to cool down before we take the final dimensional pass. It's still got a bit of warmth in it. It's currently 1.5 thou undersize, and that's undersized to these positions. The centre section of that journal is 1/2 thou below these. It was 1.5 thou. I don't know why. There was some quite bad ridges and wear, so I'm assuming that. Anyway, I've had that up and cleaned it up, and I've left this bit slightly under, so it'll be oil pocket area. Well, that's both the bushes made up now. Once they're pressed in, I'll have to drill the oil way for that one, which is the thin one, and then that needs scoring out. Chris says he's going to show me how he does that. That one then pressing in, and then from memory that's only got oil ways in it, but there's no, the oil is delivered via a hole in the shaft. So I'll be interested to see what he recommends for that. Look at that waste. Ooh. Bit of sweeping up to do. Got one more piece of bronze work to do, which is the shoes for the yoke, which moves the clutch in and out. Who knew sawing through bronze was so bloody hard work? I couldn't think of a way of holding it to do it to any other way. Anyway, that's that done. I'm just facing it off now on the shaper. I'm only taking it slow because I don't want to spray chips everywhere. It does make a nice finish. You can just see a little bit of chatter on the start of the cut. Yeah, shame my packer was a bit high. If it would have been a bit lower, it wouldn't have caught. Anyway. Bit of an addendum. Chris lent me this Brown and Sharp catalogue. It's from 1937, I think it is. I was just reading this. I'll take a photograph of it and then you can pause the screen and read down it, but it's the history of where the micrometer was developed. And I knew it was French, but didn't realise Brown and Sharp took it from a fairly crude tool to one that was, well, where we are today. The reason Chris lent me the catalogue is he's looking to replace a micrometer that he had when he was an apprentice, on the basis of he hasn't got it any longer and he would like to replace it, which is this number 11. And then he said later on, after he finished his apprenticeship, he was given a number 13, and he's not got either of them. He had a workshop in Stockport for 20 odd years, and it was robbed or burgled a few times, within which was a lot of his gear that got half-inched, never to be seen again. But yeah, just flicking through the catalogue, it's fascinating, beautifully put together as well. I have to admit, this is the first time I've looked through a tool catalogue. There's actually a price list as well, a revised price list. This is something like 1938, I think. Oh, 1936, that one. Yeah. What I found interesting was there's a section here showing the straight edges that they produced, of which we've got one in the workshop, if I can find the flipping thing. So that's surface plates and straight edges. So you can see that's the design of the narrow one that still needs scraping up, because one of the, well, both feet want replacing. So that's a job for me later, but it's 96 inches. Price 19.11.9, so I think that £19, 11 shillings and 9 threepences. bushels of corn or whatever it was. Yeah. Guess that would have been a chunk of money at its time. Yeah, all interesting stuff. Marvellous.